my name is Martha Zink, and this is Choosing the Right Tools, Assessing Your Development Options. I'm a Senior Technical Project Lead at Soliant Consulting, and I'm also the CEO of Pause on Air. I grew up in Virginia, but I've been living in Houston, Texas for about 15 years now. As the Claris platform keeps growing and as the technology as a whole keeps growing, we have to ask ourselves a lot of questions about what's the right way to do something. We are starting to look further than just native Claris FileMaker because there's so much out there now. And so, how do we get through that process? That's what this is all about. At the end of the session, I really want you to feel empowered to explore. I want you to feel comfortable that you've got a good set of questions and that you've got the right mindset to go out there and see what your choices are and to be excited about it, to see this as a good thing, even though it may push our boundaries a little bit. All right, so what are we doing? Well, first, it's pretty meta. We're trying to figure out how we figure things out. This isn't about providing the right answer, it's about thinking through the process. This is also about challenging ourselves and not just getting stuck or stale in what we already know. Now, if you've been around the Claris platform for a while, if you've been using FileMaker for a few versions at least, then you know that each version changes. There's always something that comes up in each version that can have a really huge impact on what decisions you make. And we've been doing this all along. We've had to make choices all along. So even though now our choices might have expanded a little bit, it's still using that same muscle. We're also trying to just make the best decision. And we're trying to think about this at a big picture level. This isn't about calculations or scripts. This is at a much higher level than that. Why are we doing this? Well, first and foremost, we want to provide the best solutions for our users. We want to make sure that their experience is the best one and that they're getting the tool that they need. It's not just about what the developer needs or the thing that's easiest for us to implement. This is a great chance to think in so many ways and to get creative with what's out there. So think about what you already know, think about ways to take what you know and just twist it a little bit. Think about how you can expand what you know and how you can dive into new technologies or even just new functionality. We do this because we need to keep up with the technology as it changes as well. Claire's platform itself with Claire's Connect is really growing and extending what it can do and how it can interact with other things. We need to make sure that we're keeping up with that so that we're using the best tools we can. Which is exactly the next point, which is to improve our own toolkit to make sure that we are as fresh as we can be so that we make the best decisions. And these decisions are all based in time. So, spoiler alert, it's a moving target. The best decision 5 years from now is not the best decision today, and it's probably not the best decision 5 years from now. Technology is growing and changing, and we need to keep up with that. We aim to make the decision that's right at this time and something that has the longevity that we need, knowing that it might change over time. All right, so what's an example of where we've done this before just within Claris FileMaker? Well, think about filtering portals. We used to only be able to filter portals through a relationship. And let's say something like filtering orders by date range. If you imagine a portal in a layout and you wanted to filter it by a date range, well, you'd set up a relationship with some global fields maybe. And then as the technology grew, we were able to filter through a filtered portal. And that meant that we could use some calculation logic to help us out. And then we started using things like virtual lists and scripting to get us the right found set. So now we're not even in the same context. We're using something a little bit more abstract to get the right information. And then we start using things like execute SQL to get our data together in the way that we want it. And then we start using JSON to collect the right data and to have it formatted in a way that's easy to digest. The point here is that we've been doing this all along, and the technology grows and we grow with it. So which is the right answer? Well, I don't know. It could be any of them, or it could be none of them. The idea is that they all have a time and place where they can work. Some we're more comfortable with, some are a little bit harder, some may take more investment, and that's what we're going to talk about here. All right, so how do we work through this? Well, the first thing is you have to weigh your options. Now, that's a big thing to say, and it's not that simple, but that's where we want to start. you have to think about the time and the investment that you have to put into learning something, whether that's billable time or whether it's time out of your day or whatever it might be. There is something about the amount of effort that goes into it, and also how comfortable you are with something. It's important to keep learning and to step outside of our comfort zone, but there's a cost to that as well. What about scalability? Is it going to grow? Is this something that can last for a while? Is it something that seems like a good option in the long run? And one of the things as you work through this is to trust your expertise, but not just your skills, because that in itself is limiting, but trust your knowledge, trust your experience so that you will go with your gut a little bit, but also expand your horizons, learn a little bit more, and grow your expertise through all this. As you're assessing all of your options, think breadth, not depth. In other words, think about the big picture, think what's available, dabble a little bit. If you think of this image of the doors, it's almost like you open the door, you learn just enough, and then you close the door again. You open the door, you learn just enough, and you go to the next door. And so you don't want to get too stuck in the details because it can get very overwhelming that way. Think about creating a list of pros and cons based on what your situation is. And then think about the risk versus the reward. If you're using something where the technology is too new, that could have a lot of risk. If you're using something that's expensive, that could have a bit of risk as well. If you're using something that has a good track record, if you're using something that's extremely powerful, there could be a big reward to that as well. Make sure to think about your users. Do they have any requirements that you need to worry about? What constraints have they put on you? They could be budgetary, it could be time, it could be the types of users that you're interacting with. Also, it's important to ask what appeals to them. What's the kind of thing that they want to see? In a lot of software development, it's not really about what the right answer is so much as what feels like the right answer. And so implementing something that feels comfortable to them is really important. A big one is thinking about performance. How much data are you dealing with? How often is this feature accessed? Who's going to look at it? Performance isn't just around the quantity of data that you're looking at. It also has to do with accessibility and how often maybe the data has to be refreshed, for example. And I've said this before, but it's thinking about your strengths too. I think this is an important part of the process. What can you do so easily? What can you do with your eyes closed that you don't have to worry about? There's a lot of value in the amount of time that that can save. What feels like you could do it, but maybe it would take a little bit of learning? And then what do you do when you have to learn something completely new, when it isn't part of your strengths? And think about your time. What's your deadline? How much time do you have to learn and to invest into a new solution? This shouldn't be the only factor. All of these things add up and belong together, but there is value in your time and your effort, and that's part of the puzzle here. So, what's the short answer here? It's not a simple answer. And the goal is to make a better decision-making process. It's to ask the right questions and to grow your ability to step outside of your comfort zone at the right time or to use what you're comfortable with when it makes sense. Really, you're trying to grow your knowledge and your experience. So going back to that previous slide, the idea that you want to, with every iteration of this, where you have to explore a new tool, you want to make sure that your experience is a little bit broader and a little bit bigger. And so that's not only your skill set as to what you can implement, but also what you know is out there, knowing the pros and cons, and improving your ability to make a decision on technology. Decision making isn't just about facts, it's not just about the scenario, it's a combination of things. It's about being deliberate in what you're doing and knowing that you're looking for an answer and what you're trying to solve. And it's also about trusting your gut feeling and improving that. So now that you have a broad idea of what it is that you want to accomplish and some of the questions that you need to think through as you do this, where do you start in this whole process? The most important thing is to really clearly define the problem that you're trying to solve. This is not always straightforward. When you think of needing, for example, a calendar solution, it's really deeper than that. The question is, what do your users need? What are you trying to accomplish? What are they trying to accomplish? So really think through the feature that they're asking for, the tool that they're asking for, and make sure you document that. Make sure you write down any constraints that you have. This can be budget, it can be time, it can be resources. These things are important because it will help frame what your options are. It's also important to put some time aside to the researching that you need to do. I highly recommend that this gets time boxed. Otherwise, it can be really easy to spend too much time exploring an option. But it's important to make time for it, whether that's something that you ask for upfront from your client as something that needs to be built into the process. It's an important part of the process because otherwise you can rush into the decision too quickly. As you start your research, it's important to make a list of viable options. Now, it's also important to talk about what the not so viable options are. Throw them out there because every so often I'll assume that there's some choice that just doesn't make any sense. It's too expensive, it's too time consuming, it's out of scope, and sometimes I'm wrong. And so it's important to document what those options are, just to consider them, just to ask the question, are we going to do this or not? And then finally, it's just about asking a lot of questions and comparing what those options are. Again, it's not an easy task, but by doing all of these things, it'll make it a little bit simpler. To think through this, I want to do an example of calendars. This is something that we've wanted to build in FileMaker for a long time because when you have data, especially around events or tasks, it makes a lot of sense to want to see things in a calendar format. So let's start off with what's the problem to solve, and I've just made up a scenario here. Let's say you've got a client or you work for a company where you have a lot of field workers and they need to keep track of what events they have to go out to. So this might be a crew going out, or it could be an event management company, and you've got people going out to build sets or stages. Let's also say that they are used to using the calendar on their phone. This might be more of a preference thing, but it's good to know that that's what they're used to. And it might be something that they want to continue to have access to. What if the project managers need to be able to see the data quickly? So a field worker maybe wants to see just their own events, but a project manager might want to see the events across multiple field workers. And then somebody has to enter the data. Maybe that's a project manager, or maybe it's someone like an office manager who's going in and scheduling these events and who's doing what work. So what are your choices? Well, first, you can just build it straight in Claris FileMaker. You can use your strengths and your tool set to basically build it from scratch. You can use an already built solution. So you can use something like Seed Code's Dayback, which is built on FileMaker and uses some web technology there as well. But the idea is that it's already been built and thought through, and you're implementing it into your existing system. Another option is to use Claris Connect. As Claris Connect grows and expands into other technologies, this could be a good way to integrate between two different pieces of technology, both FileMaker and something else, like Google Calendars, for example. You could also directly integrate with an API and use scripting to communicate with two different systems. And I mentioned that it's important to write down all of your options. Don't just pick the options that are the most likely ones to be selected. Another question is, do we even build it in FileMaker at all? Do we even integrate with the system? Let's say that they already have a system where they track their events. Do they need the calendar? Is that something that's really useful? They might say it's not an important feature in the short term. Maybe that's something in the long run, but it's worth considering it. Now, I will say for this scenario, we're going to cross that one out. We're going to say that's not a viable choice. We really want to think through it a little bit more than that. So start thinking, again, high level. We're not going to get down to the nitty gritty of what calcs or scripts we would have to write to make this work. Just at a gut instinct, why would I build it straight in Claris FileMaker? Well, the biggest reason is because we might just be really comfortable with the platform and we're able to customize it. We know what comes with that territory. So spend a little time thinking about the techniques. Again, something like a calendar would take a lot of effort. You might think about portals, you might think about a list view or a detail view. There are a lot of ways to think about how you could do this. And again, try not to dive too deep into it. Just think high level what it is that you would do to make it work. If you don't build it in Claris FileMaker, then it really comes down to just research your choices, know what your options are out there. Now, when we think about just native FileMaker, we do it because it's comfortable. We think that it might feel more customizable because we have more control. One of the beautiful things about FileMaker is that it lets us have that much control over design, over technique, over feature set. It also might just feel more affordable because it's something we already know, and perhaps we're not paying an explicit dollar amount to subscribe to a service or to buy a piece of software. And again, it might just give us the control that we need because we can make changes so quickly, because we can demo something to a user and then make a change quickly when they ask for another feature. So if you think you're going to go native, there are a few questions you can ask here. Do you have all the data that you need? Is there more information that you're going to need to bring into FileMaker so that you can get your feature? Can you build all the features that they need? This one takes a little bit more work because you have to think a little bit deeper into your scenario. When you think of a calendar, for example, how much do they need? Is it just a list view of a calendar? Is it a weekly view? Is it a daily view? Do they need a month view? Do they need a scheduling view? What's the feature that they're looking for? What are the different ways that they want to see this play out? It's also really important to ask what your version of Claire's FileMaker is going to provide you. So as every version comes out, we get new features. Again, if we think back to the filtered portal idea, the toolset has changed, and it's not just that one thing that matters. It's not just filtered portals. It's all the other stuff that comes with it, the JSON, the execute SQL, add-ons, and so on. You can't help but ask the question, are you reinventing the wheel? When you think of building a calendar, there's a little bit of you that might think, I can do that. I can do that in FileMaker. It's not that bad. It's going to be quite a bit of work to put it together, but then I can, again, there's a bunch of perks around that being native to FileMaker. At the same time, think of another example, like something like an email client. Rebuilding an email client in FileMaker is probably less attractive because of a feature set. If you think of all the things that any mail app does, it's pretty overwhelming. And it's taken years of versions and learned lessons and of improved features and requests to get those things pretty refined. So are you willing to potentially do that in something like FileMaker? And then a big one is what's going to happen after you deploy this. So once your users are actively using this new feature, how hard will it be to add or to change features, to upgrade them? Even though it's FileMaker, how do you upgrade that feature so that it's keeping up with technology itself and keeping up with the expectations of the users? So what if you don't go native? Well, if you're not using FileMaker, that might mean that you're reaching out to an expert in the tool that you need. In other words, are you reaching out to a company like Dayback because they're an expert in calendar software? Are you reaching out to Google Calendars because they've got experience in that niche? That's a pretty attractive option, knowing that you're taking advantage of their expertise. If you don't go native, that means you may have access to releases. And that means that they want to keep their technology fresh and exciting. And that means that you are going to get the benefits from that. Now, one of the potential downsides is that not using native FileMaker means that you might run into some issues with code. And sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper into those communities to really understand what may have gone wrong, how to fix it, things like that. So what are some of the questions you might ask if you don't go native? Well, is the pricing reasonable? That might be a question for your client or whoever's going to foot the bill on that, but it is an important one to ask. Another question is, how hard is it to use this thing from the get-go? How much effort will it take in order to even start using this technology? And then how much development do you have to do on top of it? In a lot of cases, whenever you pick a solution, you're going to have to think through what development you need to do. If you don't go native, do you have better access and more access to support and help the tool that you've selected? In a lot of other tools out there, there are communities of developers and communities of users who are posting and also putting their experiences out there or providing solutions that they've used and how they've implemented it. Additionally, you have companies out there that are providing support for their software. That may be paid, it may be free. It depends on the tool and the company, but it's something to definitely consider because as you grow the support system around you, that means that you're making your solution stronger and you have the help that you may need. And in the same vein, can you actually pay to help someone implement it for you? One of the things I mentioned was make sure that you take your time into consideration. So this could be where that stands true. So as you think through what these choices are and you're researching your choices, these aren't perks or these aren't downsides. These are just things to think about. Is it mostly plug and play? Do you get the feature faster than if you built it natively? Do you need to purchase or subscribe? Are upgrades included? Are you going to get new features as those come up? Are you preventing yourself from having to reinvent the wheel? Because reinventing the wheel means that you have to know everything about the wheel, or at least that's the expectation that might come from users. Now, this is the example for calendars, but these exact questions apply for really anything. You might think of something like address completion. If you were trying to validate addresses for shipping, there's some logic that you could build in, but there are libraries out there and plenty of technology out there that will help you do address validation so that you don't have to import a lot of information, so that you don't have to validate against a zip code table or a city and state table. Or charting. Charting is so vast out there as to what you can do with it. So if you just need a simple chart that shows some basic data, Native FileMaker might be the answer. If you're looking for something with a little bit more complexity to it, something with more options, something that's more customizable, then there are other things out there that you can consider. Document management is a big one. Container fields are amazing and they are so powerful within FileMaker. But what about when you're dealing with version control? What about when you're dealing with multiple platforms or OSs? Or email campaigns. Again, the thought of rebuilding an email client within FileMaker sounds pretty stressful, and there's just a lot to think through. And that can be said true for something like email campaigns or bulk emails. So what if you can integrate with a tool, let's say MailChimp, that does it really well already? Keep in mind technology is evolving, and the idea is that the more aware you are of what's out there, the more you can be proactive for your own users. In other words, you don't need to know every calendar solution out there, but the more that you listen to what people are using, what technology is out there, know that FileMaker can integrate really well with a lot of software. So keep in mind that you're not limited to just native FileMaker. I really think that the fear of the unknown is what keeps us thinking that we can rebuild so much in FileMaker. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of work that I do just in native FileMaker, but there's some value in a little bit of a challenge. Now, the first step of that challenge is just to take what you know in FileMaker and twist it a little bit so that you do something creative with it. But step out of your comfort zone. Try to use a new technique or read blog articles about what some other companies have been using. Take it as a fun and evolving challenge. When you're doing the research, start broad. Don't get stuck in the details. Again, there's a lot of fear that's going to make you want to stop in your tracks and say, nope, that seems scary or that seems expensive, whatever it might be. But try to think at a broad level so that you can think of what the features that you need are, see what boxes it checks off for your constraints in your situation so that you can make a short list of things that realistically could work. And really, one of the most important things is just make sure you have a clear idea of what you're trying to solve. So, again, it's not just a calendar, it's not just email campaigns. There are specific use cases, there are specific things that you are helping your users with. And it's important to know what that is so that as you explore your options, you know what answer you're trying to find. One of the beautiful things about the FileMaker platform is how innovative it lets us be and how powerful it is. And so all we're doing now is just incorporating more power into what we can do for our users. So trust your existing expertise and keep growing your expertise. Trust other experts out there as well. You don't need to be the expert in everything. Your expertise can be helping your users get what they need. That doesn't mean that you have to do everything yourself. It may mean paying for a service or asking for support from the community otherwise. And trust the community. Both the Claris community and all the other communities out there for other technologies are really invested in getting something that will work and that will provide for users. Dig in and start researching because you're going to see people who are interested in really making solid products and ones that you can integrate with your existing technology, in this case, FileMaker.